Well, the race is on to choose the next leader of the Alberta NDP and leader of the opposition. NDP members will vote in June of this year who they want to succeed Rachel Notley and face off against Danielle Smith in the next general election. With the membership sign-up deadline to vote in the election being this Monday, I thought it was a great chance to connect with one of the candidates. Joining me now on the show is Naheed Nenshi. Mr. Nenshi was the Mayor of Calgary for many years and has now stepped into the ring into partisan politics. To talk about that and more, I'm excited to be joined by Naheed Nenshi. First of all, for those of us that might not be as familiar with you, do you want to just take 1 minute or so to introduce yourself to Canadians?
Sure. I'm Naheed Nenshi, and a little to my own surprise, I am running for leader of the Alberta NDP and the next Premier of Alberta. Before that, I spent 11 years as Mayor of Calgary. I was a professor in the field of nonprofit management at the business school at Mount Royal University, and I was a business consultant working and living all over the world before coming back to Alberta, where I grew up, to make my life and my home here. I did, in fact, grow up in Alberta. I was born in Toronto, but grew up in Alberta, first-generation family, family that was pretty poor growing up, but we always knew that we had things like public education and public transit and public libraries, and particularly the public healthcare system, to look after us and help us succeed. And that really is where I come from. And I've never been involved in partisan politics before. I've always worn purple every day because it's red and blue. And now here I am trying on orange for size and helping Albertans think about whether a better future is possible here.
I'm curious, as you've been on the streets and talking to people, rallying up support for your campaign, what are some of the things you've been hearing from young Albertans about some of the challenges that they're facing, and what are some of your solutions for those challenges?
Well, you know, the word of our campaign is a very old-fashioned word, flabbergasted. We have been flabbergasted by the amount of support we've gotten, young, old, urban, rural, Indigenous people and newcomers and people who've been around for generations all at once. And it's not because of my super handsome face. As I talk to people, what they tell me is that for the first time in a long time, they're actually feeling like there is a politics of hope, of optimism, of thinking something better is possible. And that's been deeply energizing for me. It's been really exciting for me, but it also has reminded me that we've let ourselves fall into a political discourse that's all about being against one another, and it's all based on fear. So young people in particular, no surprise to you, Josh, anything that we've heard, people are deeply concerned about their economic future. I think I said for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, people your age are likely to be less financially well off than their parents. So if you think that's disconcerting for you and people a little bit older than yourself who are saying, when am I going to buy a house? When will I be able to afford to start a family? Imagine how disconcerting it is for your folks. They basically have said, look, I played by the rules. I did what I was supposed to do. I worked hard. I provided for my family, all so that my kids could have a better life than I do. And I'm not sure that's the case anymore. So to be more specific, of course, young people are talking about housing. That's the number one topic everywhere right now. Talking a lot about post-secondary education and student debt. Talking a lot about the environment and the need to really tackle climate change, that the time for easy solutions on climate change is long gone because we've wasted time for way too long. I've had a lot of deep, deep conversations with young people on the notion of equity, on the notion of how we struggle with what I call the oldest problem on facing humanity, which is how do we live together with people that are different than us? And the conversations with the young people have been fascinating because they've grown up in a world where equity is like breathing. But even they are starting to see a backlash against a lot of the very real nervousness that people feel about their own values changing. So it is, in a word, existential for a lot of young people. But I actually remain super optimistic. I believe that precisely because the world is changing so fast, We actually live in a moment of unprecedented creativity. We actually live in a moment where we get to build our future. And I call it a wet clay moment, unlike anything that anybody alive today has seen. But the thing about wet clay is if you don't mold it when you have the chance, it hardens. And then you can't remold it without breaking it. So I tell young people, and I hear from young people all the time, we've got to build a better system. We can't just hold on to some mythical past. We have to open ourselves up to some risk, to innovation, to new ideas, to thinking about doing things better and build a better community. I want to talk just for a minute, if I can, Josh, about education, though, which I think is absolutely critical. I was speaking at the University of Calgary a couple weeks ago. That's the university I graduated from. I was president of the Students' Union. They were showing me pictures from when I was president of the Students' Union, including a famous picture that I had forgotten about of me standing in front of the Student Center holding a piece of paper that was on fire. And the piece of paper that was on fire was the then brand new Premier Klein conservative government's post-secondary education policy, in which I thought that they were violating their promises. So, I set them on fire in front of a bunch of TV cameras. I have been an activist, but that day, the day that I was at the University of Calgary, it was revealed that for the first time ever, tuition at the University of Calgary is now 51% of the budget of the university. When I was president of the Students' Union, it went from 10 to 12%, and it was a big scandal. But it's now 51%, which means that all of the cuts the government has made to post-secondary education have been made up on the back of students. And in Ontario, where you are, the per-student grant has not increased since 2008. Were you even born in 2008? And you weren't, I know.
I was born in January of 2008, so pretty close.
Oh, were you really? Oh, you were close. You were close. But in any case, and they've done it all on the backs of international students as well as domestic students. But in Alberta, we've stealthily privatized our public education system. The University of Calgary is, for all intents and purposes, a private university now, if that's where they're making all their money. And yet the government wants to control their research agenda. And here's the thing, with the nature of work changing, with what it means to participate in the economy changing, we need to invest in education more than ever, K-12 and advanced education, because that's an investment in a future that we can't predict right now. And I'm deeply concerned that if we're making it harder for kids to go to university, if we're making harder for them to get apprenticeships in the trades, then we're not setting those individuals up for success, but we're not setting the economy up for success. And that's what worries me more than anything.
You mentioned that you're even surprised that you're running for a provincial party leadership. Why the change? Why go to partisan politics?
So I finished being mayor about 2 years ago, and my 2.5 years ago now. And my time as mayor was characterized by that purple. I wore purple every day, have worn purple every day for 14 years. You can see a little purple vase behind me here. I believe in branding. And most people understand that the reason I wore purple every day is because it looks real good on me and it brings out the color of my eyes. Well, it's not that. It's not just that. And as I alluded to, a lot of folks understand that the purple is a mix of liberal red and conservative blue, and it's calling people to what I call the muscular middle. But lots of political folks actually misunderstand that too, because they think that that's a statement about left and right and centrist politics. It is partly, but it's more importantly an invitation to folks to not define themselves by their ideology or their camp or their past, but to define ourselves by our common humanity. So the purple I've always seen as kind of an invitation to a conversation about the kind of community we want to live in. So I've never been partisan. I worked with 6 premiers from 3 different political parties while I was mayor. I had half of my time with the conservative prime minister and half with the liberal prime minister, and brought home money, infrastructure money, lots of infrastructure money from both of them. So I've been able to work with everybody. And for the last 2.5 years, I've been out of politics. If you've ever heard me speak before, you know that I always talk about the concept of seva. It's a Sanskrit word that means service. It means selfless service. And so I've been trying to find new ways outside of politics to do a bit of seva. And I created a really nice life for myself, traveling around Canada and around the world, helping people build resilient communities based on service, on seva. But I am an Albertan. I grew up here, and after living and working all over the world in my 20s, being based in Toronto, I chose to come back and make a life here. And like so many Albertans, I'm really concerned about the future direction of our province. I'm concerned about the government we've got right now, which is like no government any Canadian has ever seen before. It's just shocking, the government we have, but also just about the fact that we're at a pivotal time in history. The fight against climate change, combined with the public health pandemic, the mental health crisis, massive economic dislocation, AI and automation causing real shifts in what we think about as the nature of work. Young people, for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, probably not going to be as financially well off as their parents, and the incredible dislocation and unmooring that has led to means that we need government now more than ever that is smart, that is capable, that is pragmatic, and that is above all ethical. Because when you're losing your guideposts in a society, you've got to have a moral guidepost to cling on to. And here in Alberta, I'm sorry to say we don't have any of those things. We have a government that is fundamentally disinterested in governing. So I decide they just care about politics. They don't care about actually being in government. So I decided that I needed to try and help and see how I could help make Alberta better. And enough people said to me as I've talked to people in every corner of this province, look, Naheed, you have a very limited set of skills. There's not a lot of good things you're good at. I will not invite you over to help me fix my car. Bad things would happen. What we are good at is talking to people and trying to bring people around in common cause. And this point in history is no time for bystanders. Every one of us is called upon to do what we can do to make the community better for our neighbors. So in the end, here I am, traded in the purple running shoes for orange running shoes, and really have been hitting the road talking to Albertans. And I've been blown away in this last month by the response we've had, by how much people are aching for a politics that is about positive, a politics that is about a better future instead of a politics that's about division and anger.
All right, time for the rapid fire round.
Ready.
Let's talk about climate change first. You mentioned the climate crisis in your opening statement there. What would you do for climate? Do you support the federal price on pollution? I know that Alberta is maybe seen out in the rest of Canada as maybe being a
Are you
little bit
sure
of
this is a rapid fire question?
carbon tax, yes, no.
Here's the deal. If there is a Liberal government in place federally when we have our next election, then we're getting funny emojis on the screen. Then there will be a federal price on carbon. So there's no point in fighting about it. The issue is, do you believe in the federal system with the rebates? Should the Alberta have a made in Alberta solution like British Columbia does? Or should we go to a cap and trade system like Quebec does? There's arguments for and against all of them. If we have a conservative government in power, then there will be no national price on carbon, and Alberta will have to figure out a climate change strategy, including an efficient way to reduce carbon emissions on our own, because I have no faith that that federal government will have a climate change policy that makes sense.
There's been
Ask
a lot.
if I can answer a question.
No, that was good. That was good. There's been some speculation ever since the last provincial election about maybe a name change for the Alberta NDP or a branding change. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that we have to help Albertans understand that today's Alberta NDP is not the federal NDP. It is not the NDP of the past. So, but what we saw in British Columbia next door, that the BC Liberals changed their name to BC United and immediately lost all of their support, because most people don't follow politics 24/7, Josh. They're not like you and me. And so they don't know what happened to the Liberals they used to vote for. So I think a name change is probably self-defeating. However, what most people don't know is that provincial parties in Canada are not affiliated with their federal counterparts. So the PCs in Ontario are not affiliated formally with the Conservative Party of Canada, for example. The NDP are different. The NDP is one party across the whole country. And I think that the members of the Alberta NDP, as well as in BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, probably Ontario as well, need to have a conversation over whether it's time for them to be independent. Ultimately, the leader doesn't decide that, the members decide that. But rather than just talk about it under the surface, I will surface that conversation for the members to make a decision once and for all and share my opinion, which is that we are old enough now to be independent on our own. We shouldn't tie ourselves to a party we don't control. I think the costs outweigh the benefits, but ultimately that is a decision for the members of the party to make.
And lastly, if you are successful and are elected leader of the Alberta NDP, would you seek a seat in the Alberta legislature? And if so, would it specifically be in Calgary?
Yeah, so I don't believe in forcing a by-election just to get a seat in the legislature. I think everyone who's been elected was elected because they want to serve and they deserve to serve. The Alberta legislature actually doesn't meet very much. It only meets 12, 16 weeks a year. So we can actually, I could actually lead from outside the legislature pretty well. Of course, if there is a by-election, that makes sense for me, where I think I could be a great MLA as well as the leader of the opposition. I'll run. I'm just not going to force it, and I'm not in a big rush.
All right, Naheed Nenshi, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. What a great conversation. Sorry my answers are so long. The one thing, I have to say one really important thing though, Josh, if you don't mind, which is that the Alberta NDP, like most political parties, actually have a very broad view of democracy. And so most people don't know that in order to participate in the leadership race, because it feels like a provincial election out there in Alberta, like it's become the talk of everyone's on everyone's tongue. But most people don't realize they have to buy a membership in order to vote in the election. And the membership deadline is Monday, April 22nd. So coming up real fast as we record this. But the reason I wanted to mention that to you is because anybody over the age of 14 can buy a membership and vote in the election. You don't have to be 18. You also don't have to be a citizen. You can be a permanent resident. And to me, that's awesome. And the number of teenagers who are coming up saying, I want to get involved, and the number of parents who are coming up and saying, this is a great way to get the teenagers in my life voting in their first election has been awesome. So if you're an Albertan and you're watching this and you're over the age of 14, whether you support me or not, get out to nenshi.ca, buy a membership, $10, and you can participate in the election. And I'll just tell you that I've got a niece who's 15, grade 9, and she is thrilled about voting in her first election. And she's such a nerd that she's got a facsimile ranked ballot on the whiteboard in her room. Sounds like something you would do, Josh. And she's changing the rankings day to day based on the news of the day. And when one of my competitors, Raki Pancholi, dropped out and endorsed me, my niece Sophia was very upset because she had to erase the #1 person on her ranking. And I'd like to point out to you that my name has not yet appeared on her whiteboard.
All right, well, I think you have one more voter to sway at least then, Mr.
Sunday dinner, that's my job.
And that's it for this episode of Political Debrief. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I would invite you to check out the links down below for a blog post with more information about the leadership race if you're interested, and also the podcast edition, which contains our full interview. As always, I would ask, if you're interested, to sign up for the Political Debrief newsletter down below and also subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss another episode. That's all from me for now. See you next time.